Ethan Holloway had always been a laid-back guy. After 10 years of grinding in corporate finance, he'd finally made a new job, new house, and a beautiful backyard oasis tucked away in the manicured maze of Crestwood Trails. The house came with a pool. The pool came with charm, and charm came with a catch. The HOA. Crestwood Trails had a reputation. Beautiful lawns, sure. Picture-perfect sidewalks, absolutely. But it also had the most notorious HOA president in the state, Karen Stiles. Karen was the sort of woman who carried a measuring stick for grass height and took pictures of your trash cans if they were on the curb 30 seconds past pickup. She called herself a community preservationist. Everyone else called her something very different. Behind closed doors, Ethan had only been in Crestwood for 3 months, but he already had a thick folder of HOA notices. Violation for hanging. Edison lights without written lighting decorum approval. Citation for overly enthusiastic water features. A warning for using non-neutral colored pool floats. The last one. His inflatable yellow duck. So when Ethan planned a pool party to celebrate his little sister turning 16 and to show his out-of-town relatives around, he knew Karen would sniff it out like a bloodhound with a clipboard. But what he didn't expect was that his sister would invite Madison Bellamy. Madison wasn't just anyone. She was Ethan's co-worker's daughter. Friendly, funny, Instagram famous, and the niece of Governor Helen Bellamy. Oh. And she didn't show up alone. Governor Bellamy was in town for a fundraising dinner. Madison asked if she and her cousin could swing by for a bit. Ethan said sure. Then an unmarked black SUV pulled into his driveway, and out stepped a smiling teenager, followed by 2 Secret Service-style agents in shades. Karen, 2 doors down, nearly dropped her organic dog treats through her blinds. She saw the DJ setting up. She saw lawn chairs, beach balls, a taco truck, and worst of all, laughter, joy. Unauthorized fun. Karen grabbed her camera. She stalked to the sidewalk, snapped photos of the guest list, zoomed in on license plates. She circled back behind the hedges and whispered into her phone. Code 11 in progress. That's a full-blown unsanctioned event. Yes, I'm requesting enforcement. No, he doesn't have an HOA activity permit. There's a taco truck embedded. Possible over-occupancy. Possibly a commercial DJ. Possibly state officials inside the party. Ethan was oblivious. Guests sipped cold drinks and danced to throwback tunes. Governor Bellamy's sister sat near the pool with her feet in the water, laughing with Ethan's mom. Madison filmed a TikTok by the cabana. One of the agents kept watch from under a sun hat. Then Karen marched straight up the driveway like a storm cloud on heels. Mr. Holloway, she said, not waiting for a greeting. This gathering is in clear violation of Crestwood Trails Homeowners Association guidelines. You are not permitted to host events exceeding 20 guests, especially with amplified music. I'm giving you 5 minutes to shut it down. Ethan calmly turned down the music and smiled. Karen, first, I'm well within noise ordinance limits. Second, I gave notice like the HOA rules say. And third, you might want to talk to them before throwing around threats. He pointed toward the patio. Karen looked. And for the first time that day, she hesitated. The woman sitting with Ethan's mom looked familiar. So did the 2 men with earpieces standing nearby. Ethan leaned in slightly. That's Governor Bellamy's sister and her daughter. They're guests. Oh, and yes, they're being protected. So unless you really want to call this party in, knowing who's here, be my guest. Karen stared at him like he'd just slapped her with a pool noodle. You think their presence exempts you from the rules? Ethan just shrugged. I think their presence means your little HOA handbook might not be the highest authority here today. Karen's lips tightened. This isn't over. No. Ethan replied, "It's just getting started." And from a corner of the yard, one of the agents pressed his earpiece, quietly watching Karen retreat. Karen Stiles didn't just leave the party fuming, she left calculating. Her mind spun with rules, bylaws, and consequences. She wasn't just the HOA president. She was the self-appointed guardian of Crestwood Trails. And no one threw unauthorized pool parties on her watch, not even if the guest list included state royalty. Back at her meticulously organized home, Karen tossed her sun hat onto the co-track and got to work. First, she printed off HOA Regulation 17B, prohibited gatherings. Then she underlined the phrases excessive occupancy, non-residential events, and violation of noise boundaries. With the force of a suburban general preparing for war, she pulled out her HOA contact list and dialed Crestwood Community Patrol. "Yes, I need a unit dispatched to 405 Azalea Drive. It's an illegal gathering over 40 guests, loud music, possible alcohol violations. There's also a taco truck, which I highly doubt is HOA approved." Her voice, though polite, had venom underneath. By the time she hung up, she had already typed a formal violation letter and scheduled an emergency HOA board meeting for Monday morning. But she wasn't finished. She made a second call. "Crestwood PD, what's your emergency?" Karen softened her tone, sweet and urgent. "Yes, hello. There's a gathering at one of the homes in our neighborhood. It's very large, loud, and I've spotted what appear to be armed individuals who are not in uniform. It's becoming disruptive, possibly dangerous." The dispatcher asked for an address. Karen gave it. Inside the party, Ethan was handing out frozen lemonades by the pool. He hadn't seen Karen in almost 30 minutes. Madison Bellamy had just posted a group picture online with the caption, "Pool day with VIPs." Within 10 minutes, the post had over 1,000 likes and someone tagged the official governor's office Instagram. Back near the garage, Agent Porter lead on the governor's protective detail received a text. He frowned, then tapped his earpiece. "We've got PD en route. Caller claimed armed individuals at a private gathering. Sound familiar?" The agent beside him nodded and began scanning the perimeter. Across the street, Karen sat on her porch, binoculars in one hand, a tall iced tea in the other. She smiled as two black and white police cruisers turned onto Azalea Drive. This was it. Her whole authority would be validated. Ethan would be cited, maybe even detained. The cars rolled up slowly. Music lowered. Guests murmured. Ethan stepped forward calmly. "Officers," he greeted, trying to stay neutral. The first officer looked around and then asked, "Is there a Mr. Holloway here?" Ethan nodded. "That's me. Everything okay?" Before either officer could speak, again, Agent Porter stepped forward, badge in hand. "Agent Porter, Governor's Protective Detail. Can I ask the nature of the call?" The first officer blinked. "UH. We were told there were possibly armed individuals here, and that it was a loud, unauthorized event." Porter's voice remained flat. "The only armed individuals here are part of our team. This is a protected gathering. The governor's niece and family are present. This party has been vetted and cleared." The second officer looked visibly uncomfortable. "We weren't informed of any state official presence. Would you like to call your watch commander?" Porter asked, calm but sharp. "No, sir." The first officer replied, "I think we're good here." The officers turned to Ethan. "Sorry for the confusion, sir." Just responding to a concerned neighbor, Ethan gave a tight smile. "Let me guess. Middle-aged, obsessed with bylaws. Goes by Karen." They didn't respond. But Karen did. She had marched across the street, arms flailing like she was signaling an aircraft. Are you kidding me? This party is a blatant violation. I reported it properly. There are cars parked over the sidewalk. That music is still playing. The second officer sighed. Ma'am, this residence has a state protective detail. That overrides any local ordinance tonight. Karen's eyes bulged. Overrides. I am the HOA president. Porter turned to her. And you made a false report about armed individuals at a protected location. That's a federal level mistake. Karen froze. The words hit like a slap. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. I didn't know who was here. Then maybe next time, Porter said. You should ask before dialing every authority in the phone book. Karen backed away, rattled but refusing to retreat completely. This isn't over. She whispered again, more to herself than anyone else. She didn't know it yet, but she had just sent a letter to the governor's office, one that included words like abuse of power, unlawful presence, and inflatable flamingo. And that letter was about to go public. Monday morning in Crestwood Trails was unusually quiet, as if the neighborhood itself was holding its breath. Lawns were mowed, dogs were walked, but every eye lingered a little longer. On 405 Azalea Drive, Ethan's pool party had become neighborhood. Legend over nighttime Karen Stiles was at the center of it all, again. Karen, however, wasn't worried. Not yet. She sat in her home office, a framed plaque reading Crestwood HOA president. 8 years running behind her. Her email was open, her finger tapping the desk. She had sent her formal complaint to the HOA board, the Crestwood legal liaison, and because she wanted to make a point even to the office of the governor. She called it a respectful grievance highlighting the overreach of political privilege and the breakdown of neighborhood standards. She felt good about it, confident, powerful. Until 10:13 her phone rang. The caller ID said, Governor's Office, private line. Karen stared at it, frozen. Part of her wanted to let it go to voicemail, but curiosity and ego got the better of her. She answered. Karen Stiles speaking. A calm but firm voice replied, Please hold for Governor Helen Bellamy. Hold. Karen's pulse quickened. This wasn't what she'd expected. Then the line clicked again. This is Governor Bellamy. Karen sat straighter in her chair. Yes, Governor. Before you say anything, let me make this very clear. The governor interrupted. Her voice wasn't raised, but it was absolute. You submitted a formal complaint to my office accusing my family and staff of trespassing, disrupting your community, and your words undermining suburban integrity. Karen fumbled. Governor, with all due respect, the party violated multiple HOA standards. There were over 40 people, unauthorized vehicles, a taco truck. My niece's 16th birthday is not a security breach, Bellamy snapped. And your actions caused unnecessary local police involvement, wasted time, and created a file that now sits on my desk. Karen swallowed hard. This was not political, she stammered. I didn't know who was attending, but you did know there was a government detail on site, and you filed a complaint anyway. You made a scene. You contacted local authorities with false claims. And now, Bellamy continued, you've made this political by turning a personal vendetta into a power play. Karen couldn't speak. I'll say this once. Withdraw your complaint. Issue a formal apology to Ethan Holloway and the families involved. If you don't, I'll forward this matter to our legal team for possible defamation. Karen gripped the phone tighter. But I was just doing my job as president. Maintaining order. Upholding bylaws. HOA bylaws don't override state jurisdiction. You embarrassed my security team. You insulted my family. And you put yourself on the wrong side of a very public issue. Karen felt the ground shifting beneath her. I didn't mean to. I'm done here, Bellamy said. I expect that apology by the end of the day. Click. Karen sat in stunned silence. She stared at her computer screen, where her original complaint email was still open. She clicked into her inbox and saw a tray. Complaint against 405 Azalea Drive, urgent legal review pending. Her fingers shook, but her phone buzzed again. Another call. This time from Dave Burnham, the HOAS treasurer, and behind him came 6 more board member emails. Subject line, emergency meeting, Karen's conduct. The whole board had seen the complaint too, and someone, probably Dave, had forwarded the governor's reply to the entire board. Later that night, Ethan was relaxing in his backyard, water still shimmering from the weekend party. Madison had gone back home, and the pool floats were drying on the fence. His phone buzzed. One new email. Subject, apology letter from HOA President Karen Stiles. He opened it. It was short, cold, but public. Dear Mr. Holloway, on behalf of the Crestwood Trails HOA, I apologize for the recent misunderstanding regarding your event. While procedures may not have been fully aligned with our handbook, I acknowledge the presence of protected guests and state officials made this situation unique. Going forward, we hope to foster better communication. No signature, no warmth, but it was an apology, one she never thought she'd have to make. Narrator low and calm, Karen thought she ran the neighborhood. But now she was running out of allies, out of power, and soon out of time. Because the next HOA meeting wasn't just about bylaws anymore. It was about who got to enforce them. Tuesday evening arrived like a storm held barely at bay. In the Crestwood Trails Community Center, fluorescent lights buzzed, folding chairs squeaked, and whispers filled the air. It was the monthly HOA meeting normally. A quiet formality, but tonight, the air was electric. Everyone had heard the rumors. Karen Stiles, longtime HOA president and suburban tyrant, had publicly apologized. The words had shocked the neighborhood more than a car parked on the wrong side of the street. And now, for the first time in 8 years, Karen was on the defensive. Ethan arrived a few minutes early. He hadn't planned to attend, but curiosity had tugged him in. He wore jeans, a polo, and a casual calm that masked his anticipation. He nodded to a few familiar faces: Mr. Reed from across the street, the Jennings couple, and old Mrs. Dominguez, who smiled and whispered, "I've been waiting for this for years." Karen sat at the front table, arms crossed, flanked by her usual loyalists, though even they looked uneasy. Her smile was tight. Her eyes scanned the room like a hawk, unsure if the flock still feared it. Dave Burnham, the HOA treasurer, cleared his throat and began the meeting. Let's skip the usual updates. We have an emergency motion on the floor regarding HOA leadership conduct and procedural abuse. Karen interjected, tone sharp. If this is about the party, I already issued an apology. Let's not turn one misunderstanding into a witch hunt. Ethan stood up. With respect, he said calmly, this isn't about one party. It's about patterns. Murmurs filled the room. Karen laughed dryly. Patterns, yes, Ethan said, now stepping forward. Like my neighbor's son getting a fine for putting up Halloween decorations too early. Or Mr. Reed getting a written warning for excessive lawn gnomes. Or the woman you told couldn't have a wheelchair ramp because it violated the exterior aesthetic. Dave cleared his throat again. And let's not forget the time you had someone's driveway repainted because it clashed with the neutral tone guideline. Karen turned red. Those were all enforcement of the rules. I've kept this community clean, orderly, and valuable. You think these houses would sell for what they do without standards? Ethan's voice didn't rise, but his words struck like a gavel. Standards don't mean harassment, or selective enforcement, or calling the cops on a family party because your ego couldn't handle being ignored. A hand rose in the crowd. Mrs. Jennings, she stood and said, Karen fined me last spring for hanging my wind chimes. Said they were a nuisance sound. I've had those chimes since my husband passed. They were a gift. Another hand. Mr. Reed, she threatened to revoke my mailbox access because I parked over the line for 20 minutes. Then, like dominoes falling, the room erupted. Voices filled with years of bottled frustration. Karen had ruled the neighborhood like a queen with a rule book for a scepter. But tonight, the subjects were rising. Karen stood up, voice cracking. You're all forgetting how this place used to be. Before me, lawns were overgrown, kids ran wild. There were inflatable reindeer on roofs. Someone shouted, inflatable reindeer are festive, Karen. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Dave raised a hand. Enough. Let's vote. Motion to suspend Karen Stiles as HOA president pending review of conduct and misuse of authority. Hands shot up. One by one. Nearly unanimous, Karen looked around, stunned. Only two hands stayed down her own, and one of her longtime friends who looked ready to slide under the table. Karen's voice came out in a whisper. You can't do this. But Dave's gavel came down with a soft but final thud. It's done. Effective immediately, Vice President Dana Ellis will serve as interim president. Karen stood frozen, a woman who'd built a kingdom out of HOA policies. Now dethroned in less than 10 minutes, she turned slowly, facing the crowd one last time. You'll regret this. Ethan met her eyes. Maybe, but at least we'll be allowed to grill burgers in peace. As Karen pushed through the doors and disappeared into the parking lot, no one followed her. The news of Karen Stiles' removal spread through Crestwood Trails faster than a weed, without HOA approval. Within hours, the Facebook neighborhood group lit up with celebratory memes, decades-old grievances, and more than one snarky post about wind chimes and lawn gnomes making a triumphant return. But while the neighborhood exhaled, Karen was just inhaling at precisely 8:03 a.m. the following morning. 3 certified letters were delivered, one to Ethan Holloway, one to Dave Burnham, the treasurer, and one to the Crestwood Trails HOA's general mailbox. Inside, Karen's next. Act of suburban vengeance. A civil suit. The letter read, I, Karen Stiles, am initiating legal proceedings for defamation, targeted harassment, removal from post without proper due process, and personal damages sustained as a result of slanderous public behavior. At the HOA board meeting on record, this suit includes Ethan Holloway, the Crestwood HOA board, and select attendees. Ethan read it once, then twice. He laughed the second time. She's suing me for throwing a pool party, he muttered, shaking his head. Dave wasn't laughing. She named the entire board. She's trying to bankrupt the HOA itself. She doesn't want a court win, Ethan replied. She wants revenge. Karen's case was built like her HOA citations, thin on facts, thick on emotion. She accused Ethan of creating hostile conditions that incited a mob and claimed psychological trauma from the HOA vote, stating she experienced betrayal equal to that of a public shaming. Her attorney, a man named Ted Blanchard, a bottom-shelf lawyer known for chasing headline cases and offering discounts to disgruntled divorcees and HOA presidents with too much time on their hands. But what Karen didn't know was that her lawsuit had awakened something else. Someone else. Rachel Owens had lived in Crestwood for 6 years. Quiet, observant, and a civil litigation paralegal by trade. She'd kept her distance from HOA drama, but she remembered very clearly when Karen denied her family's solar panel application for being visually disruptive, costing them a state rebate and nearly $12,000 in savings. Rachel had receipts, emails, voicemails, a photo of Karen spray painting a neighbor's fire hydrant because the yellow clashed with the grass. And she wasn't alone. The HOA board had tried to stay neutral until Karen named them in the suit. That changed everything. So Rachel, Dave, and 2 other residents decided to meet in her living room with legal pads, phones, and a whiteboard titled, "The Case Against Karen." It turned out Karen had been sloppy over the years. She'd denied permits without board votes. She'd issued fines on properties she had personal grudges with. And worst of all, she had accessed private HOA member data without authorization. Rachel found a witness, an ex-board secretary who had quit after Karen instructed her to dig into Ethan's file before the party ever happened. The group collected statements, email chains, HOA procedural violations. They weren't just preparing a defense, they were building a countersuit. Ethan sat quietly as Rachel went through her plan. If she wants to bring this into a courtroom, Rachel said, tapping her notes, she'll have to answer for all of it. On the record, she wanted a war. Ethan replied, and now she's getting it. But war comes with risks. Karen wasn't sitting idle either. That week, she began filming herself walking the neighborhood, narrating into her phone. Like a blogger of suburban injustice. They said I abused power, she said into the camera. But I only enforced order. Look at this 3 flamingos on one lawn. That's an infestation. She posted daily videos, rants, claims of conspiracy, and slowly, she began attracting attention, not the kind she expected, though. Local news outlets started asking questions. A reporter from Channel 9 left a voicemail with Dave. We're following a developing story about a deposed HOA president now suing her neighbors and board. We'd love a comment, especially with rumors that the governor's office is involved. The neighborhood was about to go viral. By the end of the week, Crestwood Trails wasn't just a quiet suburban neighborhood anymore, it was a full-blown headline. Local news vans had staked out the entrance sign. Reporters were seen pacing near driveways, and someone even made a TikTok filter that read, "Am I the Karen of my HOA?" At the center of it all stood the one person who refused to back down, Karen Stiles, dressed in red, white, and HOA blue. Karen held a clipboard in one hand and a shaky phone in the other, still documenting what she called the decline of suburban decency. Here we have another example, she said to her camera, zooming in on a neighbor's trampoline. Unsanctioned backyard infrastructure. Dangerous, loud, and just unattractive. Her videos began circulating on local Facebook groups and even got clipped on regional news broadcasts. But while Karen continued her one-woman campaign for order, Rachel Owens and Ethan were working quietly behind the scenes on something that would upend her crusade entirely. Rachel had been combing through HOA archives, some of which Karen never expected anyone to find. One file, half forgotten in a dusty shared drive, contained something unusual. "Look at this," Rachel said, spinning her laptop around to face Ethan. He squinted at the screen. "That's a permit application, not just any application," Rachel said. "This is a remodel request, Karen's own, for a shed she had built 2 years ago. But here's the thing. It was never approved." Ethan leaned closer. "You're kidding me?" Rachel tapped through the records. She submitted the request to the board. She stamped it approved herself. And then did this, she backdated it and filed it without a vote. Technically, that shed is illegal. Ethan's jaw dropped. The same woman who fined me for excessive pool lighting has an unapproved structure on her property. And not just unapproved, Rachel added. She applied for reimbursement through a neighborhood beautification grant and got paid $3,200 in HOA funds. There it was. The silver bullet. Fraud. Rachel, being a paralegal, knew what this meant. Misuse of community funds, falsified documents, bypassed votes. If they brought this into their countersuit, Karen would crumble under her own policies. Are you sure we want to play this card now? Ethan asked, because once it's out there, there's no going back. Rachel nodded. You don't stop someone like Karen by arguing louder. You show the truth, loud and clear. The very next day, the HOA board met for an emergency session. The media caught wind and showed up, cameras ready, eager to catch suburban justice in action. Karen arrived early, smiling like a mayor up for re-election. Glad the board's finally addressing the smear campaign, she announced loudly, locking eyes with the Channel 9 news reporter. But 10 minutes into the meeting, that smile cracked. Rachel took the floor, calm, collected. She pulled up the document. This is permit number 204B, she said, submitted by Karen Stiles for a shed addition to her backyard. It shows an approval date, but that approval was never voted on. It was self-signed, no board record, no minutes, and no authorization to use HOA funds to pay for it. Gasps rippled through the room. Dave Burnham stood. Are you saying she reimbursed herself from the community improvement grant? Rachel nodded. Without board consent. And that's not just a policy violation. That's fraud. Karen stood. Slowly. This is nonsense. That shed, everyone saw it. No one objected. No one objected, Rachel said evenly, because no one knew. The reporter raised her mic. Ms. Stiles, did you or did you not use HOA funds for personal property improvements? Karen's face paled. She opened her mouth but no words came. Ethan stepped forward. You sued us for defamation, but it turns out we were underestimating you. Karen finally found her voice. This is a personal attack. You're all turning on me because I enforced rules no one else would. Rachel said quietly, we're turning on you because you broke them. The meeting was adjourned abruptly. Karen stormed out, camera flashes popping in her wake. The shed was photographed. Neighbors began questioning what else had been hidden. That night, the neighborhood voted to freeze Karen's access to HOA records. Her lawsuit began to unravel. Her lawyer stopped answering calls. But even in the face of collapse, Karen wasn't finished. She had one more card to play, and it was buried in a file no one had touched in years. The day after the emergency board meeting, Crestwood Trails was no longer the pristine picture of peace it used to pretend to be. Neighbors walked slower. Conversations stopped when garage doors opened. Karen's shed had become a symbol of something bigger, the hypocrisy everyone had felt, but never dared to confront. But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was still missing. People like Karen don't just suddenly start abusing power, he told Rachel, pacing her living room. This thing with the shed, the lawsuit, it's not new. It's just the first time she got caught. Rachel sipped her coffee. You think there's more? I think she's been playing this game for years and we're only seeing the last chapter. Dave, the treasurer, overheard the conversation and raised an eyebrow. You want the full story? There's one place we haven't checked. He opened his trunk, revealing a dusty old cardboard box labeled Archives Do Not Destroy in thick black marker. It had been buried in the community center basement for over a decade. These are all the HOA board records from before Karen was president, Dave explained. Most people don't even know it exists. Karen sure hoped they wouldn't. Inside were brittle manila folders, receipts printed on fading thermal paper, and board meeting minutes typed on old dot matrix printers. They sifted for hours, and then Ethan found it. A file marked complaint -2015. Inside, a formal grievance from a former homeowner named Alan Pierce. It described how Karen, then a volunteer board member, had orchestrated a campaign to push him out of the neighborhood. The complaint detailed a string of citations Alan had received 27. in a single year. Most were petty, excessive, wind chime movement, offensive pumpkin display, too many visitors. But there was something else. A copy of an anonymous letter sent to the HOA board, accusing Alan of running an unlicensed business from his garage. That letter had triggered a series of HOA inspections, fines, and finally, foreclosure proceedings. Alan lost his house, Ethan said quietly, reading the final paragraph. He accused Karen of writing the anonymous complaint. Said she was retaliating after he rejected her request to paint a mural on his fence. Rachel narrowed her eyes. But there's no signature, no proof. Until Ethan noticed a note scribbled on the back of one inspection order. Resembles Karen's handwriting, he read aloud. Compared to meeting notes from 5/15. They dug deeper. Rachel found the minutes from that date. The handwriting matched perfectly. She signed the minutes and also wrote the anonymous letter, Rachel said. She targeted him, manipulated the board, pushed a man out of his own home. Ethan felt a weight settle on his chest. She's been weaponizing the HOA for a decade. They scanned the complaint one more time and found one last shocker. Alan hadn't just filed the complaint. He had also filed a lawsuit against the HOA and Karen, but it had been quietly dismissed just before Karen became president. Rachel called the county clerk's office. 30 minutes later, she had the answer. The case was sealed, she said, settled out of court with a confidentiality agreement. Alan took a bite out, moved to Oregon. Ethan stared at the old letter in his hands. So that's how she kept power, not just with citations, but with silence. They prepared their evidence. The next HOA meeting was only days away, but this time, they wouldn't wait. They drafted an open letter, included copies of the files, the handwriting comparison, and the story of Alan Pierce. They printed it and dropped one on every doorstep in the neighborhood. By morning, everyone had read it. Karen's past wasn't hidden anymore. It was stapled, highlighted, and handed out on every street in Crestwood Trails. She tried to respond with another video framed by her infamous clipboard and a defensive scowl. But this time, even her few remaining supporters stopped watching. The neighborhood had made up its mind. Ethan, Rachel, and Dave sat on Ethan's porch that night, watching as Karen's porch light went off earlier than usual. She's quiet, Rachel noted. She's not done, Ethan replied. But she's cornered. By the time the next HOA board meeting arrived, Karen Stiles was nowhere to be seen. Gone were the videos, the clipboard, the surveillance walks through the neighborhood at 6 a.m. What remained was a silence so strange it made even the local dogs nervous. But Ethan knew better. Karen wasn't the type to disappear. She was the type to regroup. And regroup she did. The HOA boardroom was full standing room only. Neighbors who had never shown up before came with lawn chairs and popcorn. Everyone was waiting for something big, and they got it. Dave Burnham stood and cleared his throat. This meeting is to formally address the findings from the investigation into Karen Stiles' misconduct as HOA president. We now have conclusive evidence of financial fraud, procedural manipulation, and falsified HOA documents, some of which were used to push a homeowner out of Crestwood Trails. Rachel added, "We've also contacted that former resident. He's now willing to come forward and share his story publicly. Since the sealed agreement expired last month." That was the first shockwave. The second came when a man in a navy suit stood up from the back row. "My name is Assistant District Attorney Kevin Harper. We've reviewed the evidence collected by this board and by several residents, and I'm here to inform you that as of this morning, Karen Stiles has been formally charged with misappropriation of funds, document falsification, and civil rights violation via abuse of authority." The room erupted. Mouths dropped. Phones lit up. Somewhere, Someone whispered, "She's actually going to jail." The Ada continued, "We will begin proceedings within the month. I want to commend the board, and Mr. Holloway in particular, for their cooperation in bringing this forward." Ethan's stomach churned. It was over. Or at least, it was starting to be. Except it wasn't. As the room buzzed, a hand raised near the door. Karen Stiles had arrived, wearing a navy blazer, sunglasses indoors, and the cold defiance of a woman who still thought she had one more move left. She didn't look at anyone. She walked straight to the front and placed a document on the board table. "I hereby resign from the Crestwood Trails HOA permanently," she said, "effective immediately. No apology, no admission, just a paper shield and a brittle voice. You're being charged, Karen." Rachel reminded her calmly. "You don't get to just resign your way out." Karen turned to the crowd. "This entire community turned against me, after everything I did to protect it." Ethan stood. "No, Karen, you didn't protect it. You ruled it. You bullied people into silence and called it structure. You didn't enforce peace, you just made everyone afraid of stepping out of line." Karen's voice cracked. "You don't understand how bad it was before I took over." Ethan nodded. "Maybe, but no one asked you to become a dictator." The board accepted her resignation. The crowd didn't clap, cheer, or jeer. They simply watched her walk out the door, and for the first time in years, no one followed her in. The weeks that followed, Crestwood Trails changed. The board voted to revise the HOA bylaws, limiting presidential authority and requiring all citations to go through a 3-person review panel. Rachel joined the board as legal advisor. Dave stayed on as treasurer. And Ethan hosted another pool party. This time, the whole neighborhood came. Kids laughed, burgers sizzled. Even the new board president brought a flamingo float. And no one worried about citations, clipboards, or Karen hiding behind the bushes with a camera. As the sun dipped low over the rooftops, Ethan sat poolside with Rachel and Dave. "You know what's wild?" he said. "This all started because of a pool party." Rachel laughed, and it ended with the HOA president facing jail time. Dave raised his lemonade. To water fights, tacos, and whistleblowers, they clinked cups. From across the yard, someone shouted, "Hey Ethan, you got room for one more float?" Ethan smiled. "Only if it's regulation size." The crowd roared with laughter. Karen Stiles tried to drown the neighborhood in rules and fear. But in the end, it was one splash too many, and the community she tried to control, it rose together and washed her out for good. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes, the best way to beat an HOA tyrant is with a pool party.